Okay. And you know how I've been having problems getting the thumbnails to load for the live show thumbnail or title? I don't know why, because today it worked fine.
Yeah.
And I did absolutely nothing different. And then I was able to change the other ones too. So I don't know why that happened. But we have an actual thumbnail for this one, which is exciting. I can't promise that won't happen again because I still don't know why it happened the first time, but oh well.
Okay.
Okay, so I did the tweet. Okay, and we'll just hang out a few minutes as we wait for people. Also, probably nobody was expecting me to start this on time, which would be fair. So I promise I'm normally a very punctual person. Just for whatever reason, like these live shows, I have drastically underestimated the amount of time I needed to set up my computer and everything.
Hey, Kelly.
Awesome. Yes, we are going to be doing a spoiler-free section at the beginning, and we will be very clear about when we get into spoiler territory. Luckily, there's still a lot to talk about without spoilers. And I think, I don't know, I think their username is something like Aowin something, who has been watching them back and like reading along with us. I think they were going to try and join live this time, hopefully, which would be very exciting because I feel like usually if there's something about trying to find a time in an American time zone, a British time zone, and an Australian time zone where it's like it does not like they're spaced so that like you cannot have a reasonable time for everybody at the same time. Yes. Hello. I'm so excited you were able to join live. And as we said, Kelly is here too. Okay, so we're a few minutes in. I think, oh my gosh, 450 pages in 2 days. Yeah. Thankfully, it's one that moves pretty quick. But yeah, it's a chunkier book, definitely than Verdigris Deep. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started with our like preliminary stuff, and obviously people can like trickle in as we go. So obviously this is our live show for Gullstruck Island by Frances Hardinge. The American title is terrible, but it's The Lost Conspiracy, so you might have that edition. I think they finally are like using the original titles in the new editions here, which is very exciting. But let's go ahead and start off with intros. Hana, do you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the kinds of things you read, anything you want to highlight that you've done recently?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Hana of the blog mainly at the moment, in Hermione, and I read a bit of everything with a bit of fantasy. And obviously lots of Frances Hardinge. She's a long-time favourite of mine. Yeah.
Yeah. And hi, everyone. I'm Kara. You obviously know my channel as well, Book Garden, because that's where we're hosting all of these. I also read a lot of everything, but with an especially large helping of fantasy. I also read a lot of historical fiction and very passionate about reading across age ranges, which I think is one of the reasons why Frances Hardinge is a favorite author for me as well, is because her books are just really hard to categorize, which I love, but it makes it very difficult to like get them into people's hands. Also, I'm glad that you did remind people on Instagram, Hana, because it reminded Kelly, and she's loving this one, which makes me very happy.
I'm glad you're loving it, Kelly.
Yeah, this is a favorite for both of us. So we've been saying it's like this is just going to be an entire live show of us like loving this book, just so you know what you're getting into. And Hana's links are already in the description, so please check those out if you haven't already. And I'm going to start the actual discussion with a quick overview of the content warnings that might come up, or I think these will come up in our discussion, which I pulled from my review and Hana's. So between us, we hopefully covered everything or just about everything. So grief, forced labor camps, murder, racism and xenophobia, natural disasters, colonialism and colonization, violence, mass murder, and attempted genocide. This book is quite heavy, as you can tell from that list. So just be aware of that those things will be in the discussion today. And okay, so kind of like we've been doing, let's just start off with our overall thoughts. We could give a star rating if we think that'll help, but this is really, let's give the illusion that we don't know how we feel about this one. And if you want to talk about anything you remember from your previous read, because I know this was a reread for both of us, you can do that too. So Hana, start us off.
Yeah, so as we've discussed, I love this book. I gave it 5 stars. I had read it once before when I was maybe 14, and I remembered, as I was reading it, I remembered the scenes, but I didn't remember much about the plot at all. But I read it twice I've read it twice in the last week. So I read it on audio first, and I loved it, and I was like, this is great, but I haven't absorbed it. So I read it again and tabbed it extensively. I don't know how well you can see that. So yes, that I think that's as good an explanation as any.
Yes, that's a pretty high vote in its favor. Yeah, like I mentioned, I also love this one. I also gave it 5 stars. It's one of my favorite books that Frances Hardinge has written. And I think this is my 4th time reading it. The first time I read it was like around the time I read Verdigris Deep. I got, I think, most of the books that she had out at that time, and I just like read them all within a few weeks of each other because I was obsessed. And this was one of those. And we were talking before the live show started that I had a somewhat similar experience. Like I didn't read it twice in 1 week, but there was a time a couple years ago when I got the book out to recommend it to somebody or something. And I was like, I'll just reread like my favorite scenes or something. And I read the entire 500-page book without meaning to. So yeah, we both love this one. I think just like this is one of those books where it's like, obviously personal taste is going to affect how people feel about it. But from a storytelling perspective, I feel like it's so well constructed and so well done, which we'll definitely get into. So yes, loved it. And I think we should just start off by talking about Hathan at the beginning. Go ahead, Hana.
I mean, I just loved her. Like we say this at the beginning of every live show about all of the main characters.
Yes.
She is so brave, and she had to deal with so much responsibility that shouldn't have been put on her. And she was so justified in all of her feelings and all of her frustration. But she's so intelligent and so strong and resilient, and I just loved her so much.
Yeah. Hathan is, I think, one of my favorite main characters from any book I've read. And I feel like she's really like a quintessential example of like a Frances Hardinge heroine, because she is like a very ordinary person who wasn't expected to have a big part in things that are happening, and she does it anyway. And I admire her so much. She's so smart and so brave and just amazingly resilient, and like she's so compassionate even with everything that she's gone through. And I'm just so impressed, like every time like she's faced with these decisions where it would be understandable if she did want to blame people or to make a certain decision, and just the fact that like every time she like chooses the good instead, I love her a lot. And yeah, I like what you said, Hana, about when she's upset about things or like the way she reacts is always so believable. And like she does have so much responsibility on her, and there are times when you can see how much of a toll that's taking on her, and she feels bad about the way she's reacting, and it's like, no, this is understandable why you're doing this. So I just really love her. Like she really is like an example I could just like hand someone. I was like, this is what I love in a main character. Like Hathen. I just adore her. Yeah. And Kelly says, yeah, she pulls you in right from the prelude of the book. I agree. Yeah, it's a very compelling start to the book for sure. Yeah, any other thoughts on Hathen? We'll end up talking about her a lot with other questions as well, but any other specific thoughts about her?
No, I agree with everything you said. And she has so much compassion, even when she's in such difficult situations for herself. She's always thinking about how it's affecting other people. I really admire that.
Yeah. I just love her so much. And okay, there's like a lot of characters in this book and they're all super interesting. So I have some, but if there's others that we want to talk about, this is obviously the non-spoiler section. We can bring those up as well. But because I think the supporting cast is really interesting as well. And I wanted to talk about Thurot is how I've been thinking of his name. The pronunciation, I mean. So what did we think about him? He has a really interesting role in the book because he's with Hathen a lot of the time and he's from the same village. So like they knew each other before, but obviously they haven't seen each other in a long time. And he kind of represents, I think, a very different approach to what Hathen is doing. So yeah, any thoughts on Thurot? I just thought he was really interesting.
I really liked him. He makes some bad choices, definitely. But I really liked his relationship with Hathen and the way that he looks after her. And because as you said, they didn't really know each other much at all, even though they come from the same village. But he takes her under his wing straight away. And he spends most of the time we spend with him looking after her, even when it puts him in difficult positions. And I liked him a lot.
Every time he calls her like little sister, I'm like, because obviously we know what happened to his little sister, and I think they're kind of like found family. Relationship is super interesting because there are times when Hathen even wonders, like, is it just because we're some of the only ones left? You know, like, is that why we kind of latched onto each other? But I feel like you can see that there is more to it than that.
Mm-hmm.
So I liked him as well. And as you said, he makes some bad choices, but I think one of the things I really liked about a lot of the supporting characters that Hathen works with throughout the book is it doesn't feel like the book is judging them for the way they felt about things. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think we're supposed to agree with everything they did, but it's not written in a way that's like, well, obviously they should have known better. It's like, this is how a lot of people would respond to this. Mm-hmm. Like Thurot is like that, I think, and there's a few other characters too.
Yes, and he's written very sympathetically, I guess, in that. So you understand why he's made the choices that he's made, and you can't really fault him for them.
Yeah. Yes. And then actually, I think I'm realizing a lot of the characters I have down are from The Reckoning. So should we just talk about them collectively and then get into some specifics? Because very interesting, obviously a really important part of the book. So yeah, like general thoughts on, I guess, how the group of them functioned in the story, and any like specifics too, because I do have more characters to talk about.
Yeah, I thought they were really interesting, kind of as a picture of resistance to colonialism, because they're really the only sort of almost a militia kind of thing. They're the only real resistance that we see. Everyone else has kind of just got used to the situation. So I think in that sense, sort of they represent an interesting concept.
Yeah, and I like that they're all so dedicated to helping Hathen. And I mean, you could argue that part of that is because of I don't know, like the rules, like it's like the rules that every lace person is supposed to help somebody on a revenge quest. But kind of like with Thurrott, it's like you can see that there's more to it than that. Like they really do care about Hathin. And something I really like about this book overall is even though the obstacles and the antagonists are really serious, I like that it's never a question of like, is Hathin going to be able to find people to help her? It's like she has allies, and we're like, the reason we're still stressed is because the conflict is like so big. But you know, it's nice to read a book where the tension doesn't come from like nobody believing the main character or nobody like willing to help her or something. And Kelly says at the point she's at, she hasn't had much time with the Reckoning, but I love Dance right away. Yeah, let's talk about Dance a little bit because she was on my list too.
I thought Dance, yeah, well, I'm not sure. We'll maybe probably talk more about her in the spoilery section.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought she was really interesting. I really, kind of like you were saying about them as a collective, the way that she takes Hathin and immediately believes her straight away, and puts, you know, all the resources she has towards helping her, was really satisfying.
Yeah. And I liked how it's not just like, oh, we'll help you in the way that we think best. It's like there are several times where Hathin's like, you have to listen to me because this is my quest and I know what we should do. And everybody does listen. It's very satisfying. Also, going back to what you were saying about the Reckoning as being like resistance against colonialism and everything that's happening, I thought it was very interesting, the part where I think maybe it was just the narrator. I don't know that it was a specific character, but they were like, yeah, the colonists basically created their own enemy because by like doing everything they did to try and stamp out the Reckoning, it made people join it. Like it made people angrier. And I thought that was also very, very interesting.
Yeah, there were a lot of moments where I was like, yes, Frances Hardinge just understands people and understands society.
Yeah. Like I think that this book just feels like so well thought out. Like the way that the world building and like the history of these different groups of people and like the plot that's happening in this book and like characterization, like all of it just fits together in a way that like, I don't know, she clearly thought through every implication of what she was writing about, which is something we talked about in, was it the second Fly By Night book? I think it was the second. Yeah, like that was one thing that we talked about there, is that like she doesn't just come up with a concept and it's like, oh, this would be interesting. It's like, well, how would this affect the way people like talk to each other? How would this affect like their interactions with this other village? Like it just feels really, I don't know, smartly put together. Okay, a couple more characters we can talk about now. Tomke, he like really surprised me. I like didn't, he was not somebody I remembered from the first time I read the book, but I kind of ended up loving him in some parts. So yeah, I don't know if you had anything to say about him.
I didn't remember him when I started, but when we meet him, I was like, yes, I do remember you and I love you.
Yeah.
He's just so, he feels like a puppy, like he's so eager. And he also like, he has a really interesting arc because he starts off very kind of overeager and sort of has a lot of growing up to do, and by the end he's really kind of mellowed out a bit, I guess, and sort of realized what the important things are. And
he is very much like a puppy. Like for the first couple times you meet him, he's very like, hey guys, let's go on a revenge quest. Like riding his elephant bird and being in love with Dance, who's like 40 years. Like his puppy love. Yeah, and I really like how as you see him more, you realize that not only is he actually like very good at what he does, like he's like, I really like that part where Hathin realizes what an asset he is because he's so good at talking to people and like getting them to like open up and like putting people at ease. Like there's that part where they're like with all those different campfires of groups that like they don't like each other, and it's like, oh, Tomke would like just insinuate himself into the group, and he'd be halfway through a joke, and like nobody would know how it happened. It's like now everyone's buddies.
Yeah, and even with the Sours, who they don't speak the same language. They can't communicate in words at all, but he still get through them. I feel like Tomke in some ways is the good version of Jim Boley.
Yeah. Tomke's just like, he's so much fun, and I like that he's fun, but then we also see him. We like there's more depth to him, which is typical of Frances Hardinge's side characters. Is I feel like they're very rarely like one note and like, oh, the way you meet them at the beginning is the way they stay. Yeah, and it's really like, I like that we see Tomke maturing, but we also don't lose like who he is as a person. Like he's still a puppy, but he's just a little bit wiser of a puppy. Yeah. Okay, I think those are most of the character questions I had that we can do without spoilers. So let's see. I think. Okay, do we want to do like themes first, or like story construction type things?
I can talk about either one.
We have thoughts on everything. So, okay, well, since I wrote it down first, let's go ahead and talk about, I think, one of the most prominent like themes or elements of the book, which is the portrayal of the Lace people and the commentary on colonialism and xenophobia, and just like how all of that works together. And I actually have a quote that I want to share here because I think it does a really good job of setting that up. Let's see if I can find it. I had it marked originally. I know I took a picture of this one because it was
Is it the one where he calls him an infestation?
No, but that's a good one too. Yeah, there's a lot about language here. I have seen this photo. I know I took it. Okay, here we go. So this is like very close to the beginning, actually. And Hathin is in, I think she's in the smaller town. I don't remember what the name of it is. But she's talking to some towners, and it says, there was a shout of laughter at the idea of the little lace girl kidnapping the burly towner and taking him away to sacrifice. It was a joke, but centuries of distrust and fear lay behind it. Soon somebody would say something that was sharper and harder, but it would still be a joke. And then there would be a remark like a punch in the gut, but made as a joke. And then they would detain her if she tried to leave, and nobody would stop them because it was all only a joke. So that is one quote that I remembered even from the first time I read this, because I think it does such a good job of like setting up a lot of the backstory here that's going on. So my original question was like about, because I got off like into specifics here, but just like about the portrayal of the Lace and the history of the colonization of this island and the different groups of people. And there's like a lot to talk about there, but like any kind of general thoughts you had on that.
Yeah, no, I'd marked that quote as well. And the whole thing is so realistic and so reminiscent of real life examples of settler colonialism that have happened. And yeah, I thought it was very well written and kind of very concisely expressed, kind of. So there's just a few quotes like that one that just really convey the horror of it kind of in few words, but very effectively.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's like just from a couple things like that at the beginning, you already know, like you already get such a good sense of how these people relate to each other. And obviously the rest of the book explores that a lot more, but it's just, yeah, like she does a really good job of like giving you just a couple scenes like that, and you know what's going on, like, you know, where we're starting. Yeah. Something I thought that was really interesting too is the specific, like the specific history we get about like hundreds of years ago, how there were lace, like there were sacrifices, like they were kidnapping and killing people. And I thought that was a really interesting choice because I think I don't know, I think it would have been easier if like we find out like, oh, it was a misunderstanding, you know, it's like they never did that, but they did. And Hathen even acknowledges like, yeah, that was horrible and we were wrong and we shouldn't have done it, but also that doesn't mean you get to treat us however you want, like in perpetuity, you know. So I thought that was just like, I don't know, that storytelling choice I think was very interesting, that it's like, yeah, they did kill people, but also this is not okay what you're doing.
Yeah, no, I thought that as well. And it's, yeah, as you say, like, yes, the lace haven't always been perfect, like model systems, but that doesn't mean that they deserve everything that's happened to them either.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so another theme, or I guess motif is like a better description of it. But like language and names is a really, really important part of the book, and like the world building and characterization even. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Like, how did you, I don't know, like I guess what are some examples of the way that functioned in the book? I feel like I'm giving you like a worksheet, like list 3 examples of language and names used in the book. So anything you want to talk about related to that?
Yeah, no, I thought the name's really interesting, and the concept that the lace name, their names are meant to reflect sort of natural sounds, was a really interesting concept. And also, like, this is slightly a side point, but as I listened to it first on audio and then read it, and I was like, none of these are spelled the way I thought.
Yeah,
the way I thought they should be spelled, which was interesting because they're very kind of like, as all of Frances Hardinge's work, they're very sort of, I don't know, idiosyncratic names. But yeah, I feel like they fit the characters well. Like Hathen just embodies her name. I feel like it's
yeah. And I think also just like the different dialects that people use are super interesting. Like I love the bit at the beginning where it's explaining how like where Nundasruth came from, and how like the name is a corruption of like not under this roof, and it was like the like street language, and the parents were like, no, you're not going to speak it, and of course like all the kids learned it anyway. And like the proper speech is called Doorsy, because it's like for indoor use. I just like little details like that, I just think made it feel like such a lived in world. Like of course there would be multiple languages on this island. Yeah, I really loved everything related to language and names, and like you said, how people really embody their names.
Yeah, and I also loved the idea that that nature responds to certain languages, the lace language specifically, and not to the others.
Yeah.
Like the invader languages, basically.
Yeah, and I really liked too how the language and naming choices, it was not just like, oh, this is a cool like world building detail, but it like really deeply affected the plot and story. Like we'll get into this more in the later part of the live show, but like the one of the reasons that the lace names are meant to mimic natural sounds is because they don't want to wake the volcanoes, and they have stories about the volcanoes, and like the way that all of that I think fits together is just like so impressive. Like I really love that. Yeah, and since we're kind of on the topic already, we've talked about this already, but any further thoughts on like the world building and the setting of Gullstruck Island? Because we go to quite a few different parts of the island, or maybe not as many as I think of, because I'm thinking now, I'm like, oh, wait, they only go to like a few different towns, but so much happens at each of them.
Well, there's the towns, but there's also all the different volcanoes,
like the
which
jungle
are all
and
different.
the volcanoes. Yes.
And the jungle and the beach and the caves, everything. So yeah, it is. It's so expansive. and it feels like you're saying, how the attention to detail, like she's really thought out the entire geography of this island, and it feels real.
Yeah, I think I don't remember when I think I described it as this way to either somebody I was talking to or in a video or something. But one of the things I love about her books, and specifically this book is a great example, is like there's so much attention to detail that it feels like she has like this whole library of backstory about Gullstruck Island, and she's only telling us what we need to know. But you can just feel that she's thought about the rest of it too.
Mm-hmm.
I really love that. Like, it's very intentional. The world building and the differences between all the cultures and traditions and languages was phenomenal. The sheer attention to detail was so immersive. Yes, I agree. Kelly said she loved how the names were so important that when someone died, they were said to have no name anymore. Yes, I loved that. And how it wasn't just like a throwaway line. It was like we see that recurring throughout the book, like that discussion of what does it mean to have no name. And yeah, I also really liked everything about the volcanoes and the stories.
Yeah. Maybe this is slightly spoilery, but did you read the volcanoes as sentient?
I don't know if I thought of it in those terms, but when Hathen was personalizing them in her head, I was like, yeah. So I don't know, do with that what you will, but like they do have very distinct personalities, and I definitely like the way Hathen was viewing them, like I went along with, you know? Like I guess I believed the way she viewed them more than I believed like the Ashwalker, Brundrel, who we didn't talk about, but I don't know if you had thoughts on him. He's kind of like there for one reason.
No, well, actually, that was, maybe we'll talk about this in the spoiler section, but I thought the bit where he's chasing her and she's escaping sort of towards the beginning was really interesting, both from looking at him and from looking at the volcanoes.
Yeah, and I feel like the way that things play out in the story, I think seems to support the way Hathen and the Lace view the volcanoes more than outsiders do, which I liked that detail as well, that it wasn't just like, I don't know, like I'm glad it didn't come off as like people who know better, you know, it's like they're like, oh, the natives believe this, but we know that's silly, you know. So I really appreciate that the story itself, it seemed to like allow I don't know, it took the Lace characters at their word, which I liked. Yeah, Kelly says she thought they felt very mythical. Didn't read them as sentient, but I felt they were to the indigenous people. And then have another opinion. I thought they were sentient. I believed in their stories 100%, and there was a question there, like a lot of coincidences.
Yeah,
right.
The coincidences, because and like when Hathen's talking to them, and the thing that that she's asked for seems to get a response, and yeah, it could be just nature. Yeah. But it, like, the number of times it happens, it feels like maybe there is something there.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it felt very very like well balanced. Is that the word I'm looking for? But yeah, I liked that as well. Yeah, everyone was so frightened of ending up as a sock. Yeah, I love that part where Hathen is talking to, I think it's Thurot, and like they've been on the run for like days, like they're in fear for their lives, and they just like they start laughing because Hathen's like, a man wants to turn me into a sock. Yeah. Yeah, I like that it can be viewed either way. That makes it feel like a very real religion. And it felt much more respectful of the belief system than if it had been like one way or the other. Like Kelly said, it made it feel more genuine. Yeah. Okay. I think, let me look at my notes again. I think that's most of what I have that we can talk about without spoilers. So anything, Hana, that you want to talk about before we get into the spoiler section, or anything you guys in the chat want to talk about without spoilers?
I don't think so. That's as non-spoilery as I
I know, it's like so many of the characters and the themes. I'm like, I can't really get into this yet. I mean, it is a long book, so it makes sense that there's like a lot of things that happen after like certain points. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have that we can do without spoilers. So we are officially going to be getting into the spoiler section now. So if you have not yet finished the book and you don't want to be spoiled, then this is your cue. And we will hopefully see you next time, which is another favorite book for both of us. And Hana's going to be leading the discussion of that one.
And another long one as well.
Yeah, so start early. Yeah, thanks for being here for this part,
Kelly.
Coming. I'm really glad that you've been enjoying it so far. Okay, so officially in spoiler land. I have so many like characters and things to talk about, so I'm just gonna pick one. Let's talk about Arilu, because yeah.
I really struggled with her for most of the book, to be honest. I found her very frustrating. And when Hathan found her frustrating, I felt that was very justified.
Yes. I feel like we both identify with Hathan so much that it's like we feel about Arilu the way she does.
But I also don't know if she's meant to be read as a disabled person. And I'm wary of kind of just dismissing her as annoying.
Yeah.
In that sense.
I know what you mean. I also had that question, I guess, because initially it feels like that's how we're supposed to possibly view her. But then with the revelation that she is lost, that changes it. And it's hard because a lot of the things that people in our real world who are disabled, like behaviors or habits, a lot of those in the world of this book can be a sign that somebody is a lost. So I think that kind of further complicates it. Yeah, and I, like, when I was reading the book this time around, I did not remember that Arilu was actually a lost.
Yeah,
like, no. I didn't remember how that went.
And especially because towards the beginning, because I was thinking that, you know, are the volcanoes sentient or not? It's an open question, and I was wondering if whether Arilu was lost or not was going to be similarly left as an ambiguous point. I didn't remember that at all.
Yeah. I got very frustrated with her sometimes, and the fact, like, the thing that made me so upset on Hathan's behalf was that she, like, adopted this other family, and I'm like, Hathan has been loving you your whole life. Like, what is wrong with you? Yeah. But then, like, the part, and since we're in spoilers, we can talk about anything we want. But the scene at the end where, like, Arilu, like, finds Hathan, like, in the rubble, I was like, okay, I guess you do love her. You still should treat her better, but...
Yeah, it's every time that she says her name as well. And every time Hathan's like, I can't be angry with you anymore.
Yeah. I was thinking about this before we started. It's like, one of the things that I love about Frances Hardinge's, like, books and characters, and that makes it, like, you know, not stressful, but very, I don't know, difficult to read them, is that, like, she doesn't let you write people off very often. Because, like, I was like not on Team Arilu for a while, but then she would do things, and, like, Hathan would be won over, and I'm like, okay, I'm kind of I'm won over too. And then let's see. It really highlighted what it's like to have to care for a family member. And I feel like the way, like, I love that when Hathan does get upset and frustrated, it's never shown as, like, oh, she's a bad sister, or, like, you know, it's very understandable why why she would feel this way. And as you said, like the question of is Arielu disabled, that makes it that's hard to reconcile, I guess, with like the way that Hathin does get frustrated, because obviously that makes it different. Yeah, I'd be interested if you ended up making up your mind on this. I think by the end of the book, I'm leaning more towards that she isn't disabled, that she is a lost, and like that's why. I mean, like we see the way that they interact with their bodies is very different. So I don't know if you had like a conclusion by the end.
Yeah, I thought the same, because she can speak fine. She's completely verbal, just not in the right language.
Right.
And she, yeah, and as you said, like in this world, that is how the lost behave. But yeah, but I feel like for a real world reader, it kind of doesn't matter if she is disabled in the context of the book or not.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that even if we could definitively know that she was or wasn't, it's like with the real world context, it's like that's gonna affect how we view certain things. Yeah, I think that's a good point.
But I'll tell you, I was frustrated, I think justifiably frustrated, with the rest of their family. And every time they were like, Hathin, you haven't fixed this problem. I was like, she's 13 and she is dealing with Arielu all on her own.
She's a baby. I know. And at the beginning, when it's like Hathin was born to take care of Arielu, like that's why her mother had her, I was like,
yeah. And every time when they're doing the tests, and I think even the sister is looking at her like, you haven't solved this problem. And Hathin feels so bad. And she's like, the entire village is going to lose our livelihoods and it's all my fault. And it's like, it's not your fault.
It's not your fault. You're 12. Like, oh, yeah, I know. Like the crushing responsibility that she's like, yeah, this is fair. This is my fault. It's like, no, it's not. I'm just going to keep calling you Eowyn. I hope that's all right. Eowyn said, she just read that she paid far less attention than she should to her body. Most lost found it hard to interact with their bodies, but she just wasn't interested. Yeah, I think that's also a valid point, like especially because apparently she has been going to the Beacon school and she just didn't care. Like Hathin at one point, she's like, she doesn't have a very good attendance record.
Yes.
Yeah, that's also a good point. Very immature, because she never had to think for herself or be anything but revered and worshipped. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of like reasons that could feed into how she comes off in the book. Yeah. So, should we talk about Jim Boley? That's how I've been saying her name. I don't know if that's...
The audiobook said Jim Boley, so...
Jim Boley. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try to remember that.
I feel like she's just like the epitome of chaotic evil.
She is? I had that exact thought. I was thinking about alignment charts while I was reading this book, and I'm like, chaotic evil, without a doubt. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, she was just awful. And for no apparent reason. Like she didn't really we didn't get much of a backstory for her or kind of a reason for why she's so awful, but she just loves chaos.
Yeah. I feel like the reveal about her happened much earlier than I thought it would. I remembered that happening like halfway through the book, and it's like within the first 100 or so pages, it's like, something's not right with her.
Yeah, I just need to run downstairs.
Yeah,
I will be back in a minute.
Go for it.
I'm back. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Eowyn said, one of the only Frances Hardinge enemies we really saw coming. Yes.
It's true. Yeah, I think it's interesting kind of plot-wise, because it's very obvious from very early on that both Jim Boley and Camber are the villains. In terms of we have no idea what happened to the Lost or any of those kind of elements, but I feel like in that sense you're not wondering.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm trying to remember from the first time I read this book, like 5 years ago. I don't know. I think I was so caught up in this story, I wasn't trying to figure out who the bad guys were. But I remember Camber. I think I knew he was bad. I was less surprised about him than I was Jim Boley, just because I think her kind of character in other books would have been, I don't know, not that she wouldn't have been the villain, but like she's kind of the playful one, and she's like the one who everyone in the village is comfortable with. And not that those characters are never the bad guys, but I just remember for whatever reason that being more surprising to me. But like I said, I think part of that could just be that I was just having a great time reading the book, and I was like, I don't know, I'm not going to think about it. Tell me who the bad guys are, Frances.
Yeah, but I feel like because she sets the townspeople on the lace.
Oh yeah, that part is
so it's pretty clear from then on.
Yeah, I guess I should have specified. I didn't know that she was bad until like that happened. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, that's a pretty clear declaration of whose side she's on. Yes, I think that's what I was trying to get at. She would have been excused as eccentric. Yeah, and she's like a really. I mean, her and Camber both are terrifying in the way that like there are people like that and they are very good at what they do. I mean, that scene when we see Jim Boley like single-handedly starting that like rumor that turns into a riot is like terrifying how effective she is.
Yeah, but I also loved the bit where she meets Tomke on the road, because at that point you still think Tomke's, and you're like, oh no, Jim Boley is going to get all the things out of Tomke, and then later on you discover that no, it's the other way around.
I love that. That was another thing I forgot about, because like we have that part and I'm like, oh no, and then later Tomke's like, oh yeah, she was super sketchy. I told her nothing. I'm like, I love you, Tomke. Good for you. Yeah, I loved that part as well. I just lost my train of thought. Anything else about Jim Boley? What I was going to say, something I find very interesting is just comparing my thoughts on other Frances Hardinge villains we've had. We talked about how like Lady Tamarind is just like so fascinating, whereas like with Jim Boley, I'm like, I hate her and I want her to get pushed into a volcano, like, which she kind of does, like, sort of what happens. I don't know if I had any thoughts about that, but I just think that's interesting that like Lady Tamarind, I'm like still kind of charmed by at the end because she's just so interesting. Whereas Jim Boley, I'm like, shove her into the mountain, Hathen.
Yeah, well, I feel like also because she keeps, I don't know, like they keep catching her, and she keeps getting away and doing something even more terrible.
Yes.
I'm done with you now. You can go away.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I like her finally getting defeated is like one of the most satisfying moments in the entire book. Yes, I agree. Yeah, the massacre kind of makes you hate her forever. Yes. Yeah, I mean, the fact that one of the first major events in the book is like a mass murder of everyone in Hathen's village is like, I just want to like throw this book at people who say that middle grade is always like happy and, you know, like nothing bad ever happens. Yeah. Okay, we talked about him a little bit, but other thoughts on Camber?
Terrifying, like you said. Because like Jim Boley is wild but kind of feels unrealistic, whereas Camber you can imagine being a real person.
Yeah. And even some of the things he says, it's like there are real politicians who say these things, like lots of them. Yeah, I think I agree. I think that's one of the things that makes him such a scary villain is like there are people like this, and yeah, just like the way he's like, well, of course we need to have work camps for the children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
way like he's masterminding everything, and it all unravels bit by bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so speaking of Camber manipulating everything, Minchard Prox. Thoughts on him as a character?
I thought he was so interesting because he, like, in the end, he has a good heart and he does the right thing. And even at the beginning, he tries his best.
Yeah.
And he, like the bit where Hathin gives him the shell full of water, and he's like, he just feels bad for her and wants to help her. But at the same time, he gets pulled into this whole mess without questioning it at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I have very like complicated feelings. It's like I want to like him, and I do sometimes, but it's very similar to how Hathin feels, where it's like she hears about these terrible things that he's doing, and then she keeps thinking about how nice he was like when she met him, and how like she thinks that there is still good underneath that. And like you said, we see at the end that there is, but yeah, it's like he was poisoned by Camber's influence, but like you're still responsible for your own actions, and like how yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like
well,
I
and
just
also like at the end when Dance and Hathin show up and he thinks they're there to kill him, and he's like, yes, if it will save the rest of the town, then I'm happy to die. But he's doing that on behalf of the, I've forgotten what they're called, the Cavalcast
yeah.
people. And like, would he do that if it was a village full of lace? Probably not.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because he is one of the more we don't meet that many Cavalcast characters, but like he's one of the ones who is more sympathetic to the lace. But then most of the actions that we see him taking himself are like really horrible towards them. So yeah, it's like how much like if he had the opportunity to save a village full of lace, like would he do it? Because he's horrified when he thinks that the volcano is going to kill like all those children, but it's also like you put them there. um yeah, it's all he wanted was to get the job. Yeah, I did feel sorry for him sometimes, and then other times I'm like, but you have the power to do stuff about this.
Yeah, and the part where Camber is thinking that, you know, in a few more weeks he would have been,
Yes.
which is terrifying.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Do you think that's true? Because I don't know. Do you think that would have been true, that if it were like a month later, he would have been okay with everything that they did?
I don't know. Like, I don't know. At that point, would he just be too far into it to I don't know.
Yeah, I do think one of, and we never get this like explicitly in the book, but I personally think one of Camber's like the fatal flaws is a typical one for villains, which is that they don't really understand why somebody would do something selfless, like something that doesn't benefit them. So there's part of me that hopes that maybe he doesn't understand that Minchard Prox has some lines that he would not cross, even if Camber was still manipulating him. So I hope that he wouldn't. But yeah, I don't know. I almost wish. I don't know how this could have worked with the structure of the book, though, but I almost wish we had gotten a little more time of Prox, like, I don't know, switching, like making that decision in his head, or that we had gotten more indication that he was still like underneath. You know what I mean? Like, because we so much of what we see him doing is like just what Camber's telling him to do, and we don't really get. We get a little bit about how he's like, oh, I don't know about this. But then Camber's like, oh, no, this is why it's a good idea. And he's like, oh, okay, makes sense. And like, that's all we get. And so I do believe that Prox would have done the good things he does at the end. But I wish we would have gotten more set up for that. just to show us more definitively that like he was making like he would have made good choices himself.
Mm-hmm.
Says his mind was too malleable and driven by revenge. Yeah. It's interesting because he doesn't come off like somebody who is very easy to manipulate, but I think Camber was like very perfectly placed, and he seemed like this person in authority who, of course, he would know the best thing to do. And
yes, well, and also the fact that when he first meets Camber, he's sort of completely out of it.
Yes, I was thinking about that.
By the time he like regains full consciousness, Camber's just there.
Yeah. I thought about that as well. I was like, he did actually have a brain fever for part of this. So if that could be an extenuating circumstance, that would maybe explain some of it. But yeah, and just every scene we get with Camber, like especially, well, everything really, but like at the beginning when he's just, everything sounds so helpful. He's like, oh, you don't have to remember who these people are. He's like, I'll remember for you. He's like, do you want to, oh, you told me you want to set up your office here, right? So I'll set that up for you. And it's just like made my skin crawl. Okay. Oh, one character I think is kind of interesting. The governor, was he the governor? No, the
superior.
The superior.
The Duke of Sidrollo.
Yeah. Thoughts on him?
He was also kind of, he ended up doing the right things, but for completely wild reasons.
Yeah. I do like that we get one of the first like decisions we see him make is that he's not going to hand over Hathin.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that sets us up for like, all right, he's very stressed, but he is a basically good person. And even like, so when Hathin is like, I'm stockpiling lace people, and he's like, you're what? And he's like, okay, but no more. And then she brings more, and he's like, okay, but no more.
And then they all come out of the curtains, and he's like,
yes, yes. And I like to one of the parts I marked is after the attempt on his life. Let's see, where's my photo? And like, yeah, so like all the lace are like popping out of the curtains and windows. He's like, oh, we wouldn't have let him get to you. And he's like, when did I get a lace bodyguard? And Jace says, since you decided not to throw a young girl to an ashwalker, Jace answered calmly, in these poison times, a little kindness goes a long way. So I like that. I like that we got, it seems like, yeah, some of the reasons he does things are sometimes questionable, but I feel like we get enough of him choosing to do good that like overall I liked him as a character. Yeah, and I like that we see the good side to him before he makes the other questionable choices.
Yeah, and I don't think I marked the exact quote, but the bit that like, since dying, he was the most alive he'd ever been, or something like that.
Yeah, when he's like, I can marry my housekeeper. He's like, do I have a housekeeper? I don't know, but I'll find one and marry her. And it turns out he does have one, and he marries her. Who apparently had been in love with him for a while. Yeah, I really liked it. And I think he also, like, his parts were some much needed humor, I think, in the book. Yeah.
I think that's kind of what you were saying at the beginning, Cara, about how Francis Hardinge's really thought through the consequences of all of this right to the end, because, you know, yes, that probably is what would happen in this world where people value ashes more than living people.
Yeah. And I like also that even though we're seeing if you pursue these things in a certain way, it's obviously bad, but it doesn't feel like the book is saying, oh, these people are bad for like viewing their ancestors with respect, or like that part where Hathin realizes that the Sours have like taken all the ashes and used them on a flag. It's like obviously the Lace people don't have the same burial practices, but she's still kind of like horrified that they would do that to somebody else's, I guess, like belief system. Yeah, I thought that felt very. I think it was done in a good way, because we do see that if you carry these things to the extreme, like you said, if people care about ashes more than living people, like this is what happens. But the beliefs themselves are not necessarily like bad. Yeah. Any other character things before we get into a couple of themes?
I don't think so. I think that's one of them.
Okay. So one of the other big ones that comes up a lot in this book is the idea of revenge and justice and the cycle of violence and how all of those connect. So big topic. But any thoughts on that? Because I think those are all very different things, and the characters all have very different ideas about them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's what's so interesting, because we get so many different perspectives on it within the book. And the book doesn't, well, it kind of comes down on the side of one of them, but it presents them all as equally justified in some ways. And like the bit that you mentioned about how the actions of the Camel Cast had created the reckoning, basically, and grown it, which I thought was so reflective of what happens in real life.
Yeah.
But then also you have Hathin, who is determined to save them all, even in the face of incredible opposition from Dance, this person who she looks up to and who is much older and stronger and theoretically wiser than she is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that part near the beginning where like Thurot wakes up and Hathin is crying because she can't make herself kill a frog. I'm like, I just love Hathin so much. I think, as you said, it was done in a way that we're not meant to, I think, agree with everything that everyone does, but we are meant to understand it. And like we can really understand why people would pursue revenge. I mean, when Thurot is talking about the way he got his tattoo, like for his sister being like shot as a trespasser for like no reason, it's like I read that and I'm like, yeah, like it's very, like, I think it gets like me emotionally to be like, I feel that, like, I feel why you would want to do this. But then when Hathin is, as you said, arguing with Dance, who she respects and looks up to and thinks of as being so much wiser than her, which is an incredibly brave thing to do. Mm-hmm. It's like you totally understand why she wouldn't want to continue this cycle of people hurting each other for thousands of years, which is, again, like amazingly compassionate of her, considering that her village was massacred by some of them. I'm like really impressed with how all of that was handled. Anyone also wanted to talk about Jay's? Yeah, I had him down, but I wasn't sure which section to put him in.
I don't know that I have many thoughts. Like, I liked him. I liked him a lot. And every time he called her Dr. Hathin, it made my baby so happy. But yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed his part in the found family.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I have anything much more detailed to say than that.
I liked him as well, and I did like him enough that when he's like, oh, I have to go distract the guards. Here, take all my things. I won't need them anymore. I'm like, wait, no! Because I couldn't remember if he died or not. And I love that Hathin, like, not only stops him from sacrificing himself, but she's like, I have a plan that could actually work. Everyone just, like, calm down and listen to me. I think Jay's was very interesting because he was also very very like revenge focused. Obviously, he's in the Reckoning, and I think he's more similar to Thurrott than well, obviously than Hathin, although Thurrott ends up understanding too, like that part where he's like, I was wrong, I shouldn't have taught you anything, like don't listen to me, don't do what I do. I was like, anyway, I don't know where I was going with that. I'm just rambling about like these characters that make me really emotional. Oh, we were talking about Jays. That's right, that's what I was supposed to be talking about. I just wanted to say I hated how he stopped calling her Dr. Hathin, but then never apologized when it wasn't Wish, so she actually hadn't done anything wrong. Yes, I hated that as well. Yeah. Which also, Thurrott should have apologized too for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like Jays was much more kind of calculating and not logical, but kind of more thought with his head, I guess, rather than his emotions.
Yeah, he's more, I think his perspective on what they're doing is much more like dance than Hathin or, I mean, Thurrott kind of goes back and forth, but yeah. I also got really mad at the thing where he stopped calling her Dr. Hathin, and it's like, she was right though. And Thurrott should have apologized. Yeah. Okay, and then also, so another kind of spoilery theme that we can finally talk about, or not finally, I think it's important we have a non-spoiler section, but people going unnoticed, I think is a big thing, because we see how that is used for good and for evil. So I don't know, like I didn't have like a specific question about that. I just think that's a really interesting idea in this book, and I wondered if you had thoughts.
Yeah, no, I agree that it's a big one. And there's the quote at the beginning that's like, you've met someone just like Hathin and you've never even noticed. And also the concept of the man with no face, because it applies to both of them in such different ways. It's very interesting, sort of red herring.
Yeah, and I like how Hathin, she does get noticed by people by the end, but it's not like she's suddenly like the chosen one now, you know, like she still feels very ordinary in like the best way. Actually, one of my favorite quotes in the whole book is that confrontation with Jim Boley, and it's talking about her name meaning dust. And I'm going to read it now, even though we haven't gotten to quotes yet. For a moment, the dentist turned her head to look at her. There was hatred in her dark eyes and madness, but also a hint of incomprehension. You are dust, her eyes said. You are dirt. You are nothing. Why do you bother surviving? Why are you still alive? I am the dust in your eyes, was the answer in Hathin's look. I am the dirt that will bury you. I am the nothingness waiting to open up under your feet, and I can hold on longer than you can. I love that. I got like goosebumps when I read that. It's like, because she like uses her ordinariness like a weapon for good, and I love it. And then she screams and Jim Boley falls to her death.
And on a sort of related but slightly separate point, the idea of doing things because they need to be done and not for recognition, which I really liked, because I really like all the popular books that are out there that are like person who wants to have a legacy and wants to do something that the world will remember, and I'm not interested in any of that. And I really liked how this book was like, yes, like recognition is not important. It's
yeah, and I like too that at the end, like people do recognize Hathin's value, but it's like she still has the realization that like I would have done these things anyway because I'm me and because they had to be done, and it's like I just love her so much. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point, is that not just being unnoticed, but like recognition for like the way that everybody is like, Ari Lu is the head of the vast conspiracy of lace, and it's like, well, they don't have a conspiracy, but also Hathen's the one in charge. And then I love like when Hathen is like buried under the rubble with Prox, and like they haven't found her yet, and it's like just seeing all these people, and it's like Hathen didn't think that she like had anyone who would miss her, and it's like everybody misses her. I just like seeing Hathen get the love she deserves. That's what this comes down to. Okay, I think those are all my like actual questions and discussion points, because the rest is just like, let's talk about our favorite scenes and quotes and all of that. So anything before we get into that. We said at the beginning this would be a longer discussion because it's a long book and it's one that we both love a lot.
Yeah, the only other thing that I had written down was the kind of the idea of people interpreting actions in different ways, specifically for the bit where Brendel's following Hathen up the mountains, and every time she does something because she for the volcanoes, and Brendel's like, oh, clearly she's sending me this sign. And the way that different people interpret things in different ways.
Yeah, the one with the flower where he's like, she's taunting me. Yeah. Or the picture. Maybe it was the picture that she drew. Yeah, I like that as well. And I also think like that question of interpretation, I think that's really interesting when it comes to these different like cultural groups, like the lace and how they always smile, and how outsiders view that as like super creepy, but the lace view them as creepy because like there's that part where Hathen is she near the beginning, I think, and she's thinking about like how she's always nervous around towners because they don't smile ever, so it always looks like they could break into a rage at any moment or something. And I just think Frances Hardinge did such a good job of like showing how people would view other things based on how like their group works, if that makes sense. But I also think it's interesting that there is a point later on where Hathen suddenly gets this like flash of, I don't know, insight, where she realizes like, oh, from their perspective, we're telling them about a murder and we're smiling. Like that's, you know, like she does have that moment of like, I guess this could be interpreted differently. So yeah.
Yeah, and then the bit where they're fighting, Jace, I think it's, and Theros and Tomki are fighting about Tomki and his wanting to be wronged. And the Sours are looking at them and are concerned about the fact that they're all fighting while smiling.
Like they're like fighting through their teeth. Yeah. And it says, I love the lace smile and how it brings something as fundamental as expression into question. Yes. The superior never got it. That's true. He's like, I don't understand this. What do you?
Yeah, and the bit where she agrees or she doesn't agree to be his like diplomat to the dead, and she's like, oh, she realized it was because she was smiling the whole time and he just took that as agreement.
Yeah, and speaking of that agreement, when she's like, well, I think I know someone who will buy the soap, and it's like this, I don't even know what you would call it. It's not a pyramid scheme, but it's like something. But it's like really the best option for everyone. It's like what he doesn't know won't hurt him. But she's like, I'm gonna sell your own soap back to you so that this village doesn't starve. Like, seems fair. Yeah. Okay. Do we want to talk about favorite scenes or other like any like parts of the book, and then we'll get into quotes as well for the last thing.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you want to share yours? You said you had.
Oh, sure. Like most of these I think I've talked about. Like I really liked everything related to the volcanoes and how Hathen was kind of their chosen messenger. I really liked that, and how it like she was like rewarded for it, you know, like in their quest. I love the part where they find Hathen. That made me like very emotional, despite knowing that she was okay by the end of the book. Jim Boley's defeat was like incredibly satisfying to me. And the only other scene I have that we haven't talked about is like, I think one of the funniest moments in the book is that like weird standoff where like Hathen's holding the lobster. And Larsh is holding the bird, and Jim Boley has a knife against Arthur's throat, and Arthur's like, nobody move! And Jim Boley is like, this is just getting ridiculous. I lost it. Like, I can't. Just the image of Hathan holding a lobster hostage just like cracked me up. So that was like one of my favorite moments in the book. It's like everybody's like, nobody move or the lobster gets it. Like,
Yeah, I also loved everything on the volcanoes. Yeah, and we haven't talked about Larsh,
yes.
but
yeah, that's right. He didn't make my list of villains, but there were a lot of villains. I just realized. I remember.
Yeah, well, he was the like unexpected villain, I guess, because
yes,
he's the one you don't realize. But yeah,
he. I mean, you're supposed to hate him, and I did. And it just makes me so angry. And Hathan was right when she said that, like, it was wrong the way people, like, controlled your life like this, but it doesn't mean you get to kill all of them. Like, what is wrong with you? Yeah. And I thought that was set up so well with, like, Wish and Larsh and, like, how, because the names are based on sounds, like, yes, when they discovered how they killed the blissing beetles, like, yeah,
and that moment where it all just comes together for Hathan.
Yeah, there was something else I had originally put this at the beginning, but I'm like, oh, I can't really talk about it because it's spoilers. But like something I think is super interesting about this book is that it's not a mystery, but it is. Like, there's so much that is about finding out what happened, and I think like a lot of her books do that, and I didn't realize that until now. But that's something that I'm finding I really like, is when it's not like a mystery book, but there's those really satisfying moments of like putting the pieces together and realizing what's going on. So I really liked the like mystery subplots of this book because there were a lot of them, and they all fit with like the world building and like the language, like the fact that there's a twist with Larsh and Wish, and it's based in something that we already know about the way their language works. I just think that's so cool.
Yeah.
And even the notes that Raglan Skane was taking, and like those gibberish words, and then Hathan realizes that they're names because they were never meant to be written down. Like, that's so cool. We didn't talk about Skane, I realized. There's a lot of characters in this book. So we didn't get much time with him, but he sounds great. I'm really sad that what happened to him.
Yeah, but I felt so bad for Hathan and the whole village when she's like, oh, Skane wasn't there to investigate us after all, and we went to all of that trouble and all of that stress, and it was all for nothing.
Yeah, he like didn't even care if Artlu passed. When I first read this book, it was so complicated, I gave it 4 stars. Like, it blew my mind, but this reread, I gave it 5 because I finally understood it. Yeah, I know what you mean. There's a lot happening. Any other favorite scenes or moments? I also really like where Hathan blows up at Tomke, because like she's like, you almost got us killed because of the way you want your dumb revenge quest. And yeah, I just like Hathan standing up for herself anyway. I just really like. So
yeah, I also love the bit where they're deciding to, like, when they decide to go and save the camp, and they like look at Hathan like, yes, when you're possessed, and you speak and you're so much more confident and you ate all. I love that bit.
Yeah, like realizing that her like Ari Lu voice is like boss Hathan voice. Like, yeah, I know. I love that like everyone around her has recognized how like terrifying she can be and like powerful, and Hathan's like, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh, okay, like pretending not to know what you do. Yeah. Do we want to get into some quotes? I shared a bunch of mine already, and I think we both have a lot. So if you just want to...
I should have before we started, and I didn't like compile these into the ones I actually want to share and the ones that are just like things I mark because they're cool.
Oh yeah, and feel free to like take a minute as you go through them, and I think we can probably just like take turns since we both have a bunch. Oh, also, it's not a favorite scene, but the Path of the Gongs, the scene where we find out what happened to the village, was so impactful. Yes. Yeah. Like that image is terrifying. And I remembered that part from the first book, but it still was like a kick to the chest. Yeah, just like thinking about how all of them died is like awful. Mm-hmm. As it's supposed to be. Okay.
Go for it if you've got one.
Okay. So this one is from Dance. She says, "Men of power hate us because they cannot control us. We are driven by our wrongs, not their orders, and nobody is above our law. Not even," she smiled slightly, as if at a private thought or memory, "not even a governor." I like especially the first part. We are driven by our wrongs, not their orders.
Mm-hmm. I got a language one. Then flint clicked, a wick hissed, and a tiny flame tugged timorously in unfelt drafts. I just like the alliteration there. That's the kind of thing that you don't pick up unless you're listening to it on audio, or I don't. But just the writing is beautiful as always.
Yes. I know I didn't have a specific point about it because we always talk about how much we love the writing, but it's still true. Let's see. This was kind of something we talked about earlier. This is a temple, Uncle Larsh. There was a twist in Hathin's stomach that was only partly fear. The mention of the old lace sacrifices filled her with the shame of the lace, but the shame of her people seemed as complex as their smiles. It tugged at the root of her laceness with a power that was almost pride. I just think that's really interesting. Let's see.
We've got in the cloud they might be invisible to the Ashwalker, but what of the king himself? Would he not notice them immediately? So what, thought Hathin suddenly, so what if he steals us away as nestmates for his children? Even if he chooses to burn us into cinder patterns, so what? At least then we'd go straight to the caves of the dead, instead of spending our ever after as an Ashwalker's handkerchief. What have we to lose? Just the fact that she has to make that decision.
Yeah. And what Hathin thinks of later as like their flight across the volcanoes, and how Arilu did notice the way she was like taking care of her.
That's the other favorite scene is when she's talking to the sour girl and she's like, "We've given you this name, the one who pushes mountains."
Yeah. This is also about the like people going unnoticed. Brilliant timing, Thurot muttered. "If we're going to survive this journey, you will have to teach her something of your gift for invisibility." "Yes," Hathin replied after a moment. "Not being noticed, it is a skill, something you can practice, get good at, and sometimes you can spot somebody else who's doing it too. That man back there, that other Dorsey man." "What other Dorsey man?" "Exactly. I didn't see him either at first, but he's just standing there, putting out Mr. Prox's thoughts for him like a skivvy laying out his boots and shirt, and Mr. Prox puts them on and doesn't even notice where they came from. But I noticed him. He didn't see me, but I saw him." Mm-hmm. And that's like a chapter ender too, so it's like bum bum bum. Love it.
Yeah. 200 years ago, when our ancestors needed to find a way of purging the lace for the good of Gullstruck, they discovered that the existing Cavalcast murder laws prevented the purge only if the lace were legally considered to be people, and so they drew up a new law stating that if the lace became too numerous or troublesome, then legally they ceased to be people and were considered to be timberwolves. And naturally, if there's a plague of two-legged timberwolves, you can declare a time of nuisance and elect a nuisance control officer with immediate and automatic island-wide authority to control it, which is just terrifying.
Yeah.
But also so realistic.
Yeah. Like the way that language classifications are used to define personhood. Yeah. And there's several parts later where they call them like, I don't know if it was in that part you read too, but like an infestation. Like it's like insects or something. Yeah. This is when Hathin she rescues that lace woman and she like improvises the stockpile. The woman, who was doing her best to spit out a mouthful of dust and her own hair, twisted her head to look up. Her eyes lost a little of their wildness as her gaze locked with that of Hathin. Behind both pairs of brown eyes, 1,000 lace ancestors raised shields in salute and shouted a silent greeting across the void between. I really like that. And I think that's kind of like an overall theme is like solidarity, like among them. And I just think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I love the lace stockpile, the way they like form relationships with each other once they get there.
Yeah. And then the last one I had is like, this isn't so much like, oh, it's a really great line, but like I think this represents like one of the things that's really amazing about Hathin. This is when she's arguing with Dance about going to save the cattle cast. She says, Hathin, how many of them do you think would cross the street to help a lace in trouble? Asked Dance. I don't know. Maybe none, but maybe one or two, and there only needs to be one. Like, I just, she's amazing. Like, because I think a lot of people would not have that thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think all the other quotes I shared early. So.
Yeah. I think I have 2 more. One is, even as he watched for the shadow dance of the bats, Brendril was listening to the 2 voices passing over him. The actual words themselves did not interest him greatly, but the 2 men did. Both thought that they could use words to make people do what they wanted, and one of them was right.
Yeah.
And then the last one. Hathin felt sick and dizzy as the crowd surged forward. She could talk to people, but this was mob. Mob wasn't people. It took people and folded their faces like paper, leaving hard lines of anger and fear that didn't belong to them.
Yeah. That's a good one. And I think is right after that when Tomke like starts, he like mimes a geyser or something. Yeah, that like confrontation with the Sour Village was like very stressful. But it's like so realistic because it's like how like when you don't have a way to communicate, it's like people are going to assume, like people are going to interpret what you're doing like a certain way. Yeah.
And I also love the bit where Tomke, so like he imitates a geezer and they all think it's so funny, and then he throws rocks at them.
And it's like, oh my god, no. Tomke, like just stop and think for like a second. Yeah, it's like it was going really well, and then he's like, let's throw a rock at the people we're trying to placate. Okay, I think that is everything I have. Do we have?
That's everything from me.
Okay. So, do you want to talk a little bit about our next book?
Okay. Yes. So next month's book is A Face Like Glass, which is, yes, as we mentioned, also a big one. So the premise of this one is that it's another quite complicated one, but is that there's this world where people don't show emotions on their faces, so they have to be taught to show emotions. But we have this girl, Neverfell, who shows all her emotions, and kind of the way that throws the world into chaos when she is exposed to the people in this world. I think I've seen it pitched as like, what if Alice grew up down the rabbit hole? I don't think that's a particularly helpful comparison, but
yeah,
for a general idea of the premise, I guess it's not inaccurate.
I think it gives a good idea of like the world building and how like strange and whimsical it is, but it's not a great indication of the plot. Yeah, and this is, as we have said, A Face Like Glass is another favorite for both of us. So
yeah,
expect another PowerPoint on why this is a flawless book and everyone should read it. Yeah, but we're really excited about this one, and it'll be mid-January. Time and date to be determined. Also, one last thing on Gullstruck Island.
Yes.
Yeah, the quote when the superior is talking about the awfulness of his dead ancestors not having soap and eating with their fingers.
Yes, and he's like, they have so much money, but they can't buy it.
Yeah. And I feel like all the stuff around that, like bringing a wheelbarrow of soap to like burn as an offering, it's like, it's comical, but I feel like it's not, I don't know, it's not like, oh, look at these idiots with their, like with their ancestral like shrines or whatever.
Yes.
Like, I feel like the general tone is not that, even though there are humorous moments with it.
And I also like the idea of, I can't give my ancestors soap, but you can give your ancestors soap, and then he can pass it on.
He's like, it's weird because like it kind of makes sense. He's like, can you imagine going up to the Duke of Cedrolo and being like, you stink, like wash more? She's like, but you could do it. Like he'll pass it on. It's fine. Yeah. And then I also like that when they do find the lace porter, like the urn for him, they're able to release his ashes, which is obviously in accordance with their beliefs rather than the Cavalcast. Yeah. Okay, so I think that is everything. Thank you very much for joining us for Gullstruck Island, why everyone should read this book. Obviously, we really loved it. And thank you for those of you who were able to join us. Thank you to those of you who are going to watch this back later. We hope to see you next month for A Face Like Glass, which is another favorite. So expect more of the same when it comes to gushing. But yeah, can you think of anything else we need to talk about?
That's everything.
Thank you. Thanks for
so
being
much
here.
For coming.
And for your thoughts as well. Thank you for that. Okay, well, we will see you guys mid-January. Keep an eye on both of our like social media about the exact time and date, but again, it'll be mid-month and probably around the same time. Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.